I want to start with you, Katie. A couple of cases in Northern Territory. This will be a concern because apart from one visitor, the Territory had managed to be infection-free.
Well, we've actually got 8 cases now, wow. But they are all people that have come back from overseas. So those numbers have grown somewhat, but we did also have one visitor right from the get-go who was somebody from New South Wales who'd come to the Territory as a tourist. But yes, 2 people overnight. So we found out that they had travelled to the USA. I believe that they were in New York and they're back now and obviously have been added to our tally of those that now have coronavirus. But I think comparatively to some of the other states within Australia, we're doing a little bit better at this point, but I'm not too sure whether that's as a result of the restrictions that we've got in place or whether it is purely just a situation where we're maybe a couple of weeks behind the rest of Australia, and only time will tell.
Indeed, Katie. I'll just recap some of those numbers in a moment. I want to bring in Jack here now to talk about some of the feedback online to some of the stories this week. The Ruby Princess, what an absolute disgrace the way 2,700 people were allowed to walk off, and we know they've created all sorts of strife, 1 death at least, and well over 130 infections spread across the country. And
we now know the New South Wales Health didn't even do a single check. They didn't even enter the cruise ship before they let everybody off. Well, some of the feedback to your editorial, Kevin Jackson had this to say: very heavy fine or jail time for the person who gave an authorisation. He makes a good point. The government is cracking down to such a degree that we're going to see very high levels of unemployment. You'd expect them, on their end, to be doing what they expect everybody else to be doing. Yeah, there's been a horrible buck passing here between the states and Canberra, but obviously it was the New South Wales government's responsibility here. And as you say, no checks at all. But some people actually did tests, obviously not via the government, but then they still went off and into hotels and back to Western Australia before they got the results. We're never really going to know how many people came in contact, and a lot of the onus was on the individual cruise ship person to do the right thing and self-isolate without the government officials properly following up. We now know that they're going to be tracking phones, they're going to do all this cross-referencing, but it's made up, you know, at the time, I believe it was something about 10% of every single case in New South Wales originated from this bungle. More feedback on that particular item? Definitely. We've got Paul Caritos, who says the mismanagement, Chris, has been going on for a few weeks now at our airports. On the 6th of March, a person came back from South Korea, one of the worst hit places, but he was not checked for anything, not asked for anything. He was just told to self-isolate if he wanted to. He says, isn't this mismanagement as well? Yeah, Katie, this is the key point, right? Now, everyone knows they're coming back into this country or from overseas now. They must self-isolate, but we're just relying on people to do the right thing. Now, most people will, but unfortunately, some idiots don't.
Well, this is the thing, and this is something that's been raised with me on my show as well. People are really concerned that we're really leaving it up to, to everyday Australians to ensure that they do the right thing. And as we've seen across the board, not everybody is as responsible as others. We'd had an issue raised with us as well by a school teacher who was concerned that she'd actually had parents of children come back from overseas. They were self-isolating at home but still sending their kids to school, and was a little bit worried, obviously, about the impact that could have on her as a teacher, but also on the impact on other kids. Now, we know that it seems as though the coronavirus isn't affecting children in the same way as what it affects adults. But I think at this point in time, we all have our part to play in terms of being responsible, and everybody's got to actually take that responsibility, as carefully and cautious as we possibly can, because it's about looking after our fellow Australians. And those that are susceptible to illness and those that are maybe immune suppressed or have other underlying issues are at serious risk here.
Yeah, I know of one school in Sydney where the parents came back from overseas. They went into self-isolation but sent the kid to school. Now, that was fixed up and hopefully no one infected, but you just can't do that sort of stuff. Now, we did show you the strap on screen moments ago saying the death toll in Australia is 11. That's not up to date yet. There are 12 deaths now. That was the breaking news this afternoon with another death of an elderly man in Melbourne. There we go. It stands at 12. So 12 deaths in Australia at this stage. Now, let's get to the lighter side side of this, Jack, because we had a bit of a go at Greta Thunberg. Let's hope she's all right or whatever, but it seems very likely she just wanted to get back in the headlines because she's declared to everyone that she was feeling a bit crook and has gone into self-isolation.
And I can fully respect her message, and I think my generation particularly need as much motivation to stay home because we don't seem to be coping very well with some of the restrictions. But as Catherine Walker points out in response to your editorial, she writes, it was just announced that she had a common cold, and all this teasing of her having the coronavirus was based on her own assumption. I think that cements what we already know, which is she needed more attention.
Now, I hope she's not watching television or using any electricity while she's home. I hope she's sitting there reducing her carbon footprint. Do we have any other feedback on Greta?
And this kind of ties into the more, I guess, the economic consequences of some of the policies that Greta would be proposing.
Yes, of course.
And they say, this is from John Slater, as much as the virus is bad, it is a look at the future with these Greens and how they want to stuff this country up. You fools, think before you vote the Greens ever again.
There's no doubt about that.
Quite strong words, but I mean, shutting down flights and these broad policies that affect business, they do have far-reaching consequences. We've seen how devastating poverty can end up being.
They sure do. Katie, this is one of the side effects of this whole pandemic globally, is it's going to reduce carbon emissions significantly because industry and travel has been shut down.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Obviously, it's reducing carbon emissions, but it's having a massive impact on so many Australians. Loss of jobs. We're at a standstill. I don't think that any of us could argue that in any way, shape, or form. Even here in the Territory, though, Chris, we've sort of seen it impacting people in different ways as well. You've got people on cattle stations that aren't able to get their groceries. You know, it's just really crippling so many of us. We've seen, though, in the Territory as well, some really positive sort of stories of different industries helping each other out. The hospitality here in the Northern Territory, they're sort of teaming up and trying to help now the NT farmers, who obviously are going to have a shortfall in their fruit pickers, their fruit pruners, and packers. And so those who've maybe lost their jobs from the hospitality industry, what they're trying to do is bridge that gap and take them across and see if they can fill some of those other roles that obviously we all need filled.
Let's hope that can work out. That's great. We need to see that happen right around the country. Thanks for joining us, Katie. Really appreciate it. And Jack.